At the start, we see an actor named Tom who is practicing his lines for his upcoming movie. He rehearses the scene in a house and is carrying his script with him. His movie is a horror movie, and he goes inside the house and upstairs to practice his lines. He goes in a room, and we see this house is a set for shooting the movie. Suddenly, the lights go out and the doors close, and Tom hears someone whispering the lines he said. He is attacked, and he feels something in his throat, and he screams for help and is killed. Next, we see a girl named Lee who has come to visit her father Anthony at his house. Lee sees that Anthony is rehearsing the same lines which Tom was saying before. Anthony asks her why it took her so long to reach, and Lee says she was stuck in traffic. We come to know Lee has been suspended from her school because she did something. Anthony tells Lee they should talk about this, but she gets angry and goes in her room. Later, we see Anthony goes to a church to talk to a father and tells him about himself. He says he started drinking when his wife got cancer, and when she lost his wife, he became an alcoholic. He neglected his responsibility and family at that time and regrets it very much. Now he says he has got an acting offer because someone died and wants to do his best. He wants to make his daughter proud, and he needs the money also for his daughter. Later at night, Lee discusses the new movie role with Anthony and asks him how is his preparation going. He says he keeps forgetting his line due to his medicines, and Lee asks if she read the play she wrote. Anthony says he was in rehab at that time and didn't read it, and Lee offers to help him with his lines. They both rehearse the script, and later we see Anthony giving his rehearsal for the role with an actress. Anthony forgets some of his lines, and the director Peter asks him what is the issue. Anthony says he has some personal problems in past and became an alcoholic and now has managed to stay sober. Peter asks him about his daughter and says he read that Anthony worked in a church when he was young. He knows that Anthony was molested in the church, and Anthony has some flashback from his past. Peter says he has put a lot of efforts in this movie and tells Anthony to remember his lines properly. Anthony gets angry and decides to leave, and Peter asks him if he remembers any praise from the church. Anthony says a prayer, and Peter asks his assistant to shoot it and likes what he sees on screen. Later at a party, Anthony meets his co-star Joe, who is playing second lead in the film. Peter makes Anthony meet Father Connor, who will be a consultant of the film for Anthony's role as a father. Anthony is happy to meet Connor, and the crew celebrates since the shooting of movie will begin soon. Joe tells Anthony he is his big fan and used to watch a lot of his old movies, and Peter tells everyone that Anthony did a lot of action movies earlier. He says this movie is not a typical horror movie, and he is very excited to work with Anthony. Lee goes to her room and meets a girl named Blake who is arguing with someone on the phone. They smoke together, and Blake found Lee's play and read it and found it to be good. Lee thanks her and says she knows Blake is a famous singer who is also acting in her dad's movie. She tells Blake she is working as an assistant on the movie, and they both become friends. It's day one of shoot, and Anthony and Lee arrive on the set and find it to be huge. Lee meets Blake, and Anthony goes for his makeup, and Blake shows Lee the entire movie set. They see a robot which will be used for special effects and looks exactly like Anthony. Blake says Lee the main climax room called Cold Room and asks why she was suspended from school. Lee says she threw paint of principal's car who removed her favorite teacher from school for marrying her girlfriend. They both see the cold room and feel it is strange and gives a weird vibe. Anthony gets dressed in priest's costume, and Connor comes to inspect it and finds it perfect. Anthony asks Connor how did he become a priest, and Connor says growing up he had priests as his ideals and not action heroes. Anthony remembers something from his past, and his nose starts bleeding, and he wipes it away. The shooting begins, and later at night Lee hears some noise coming and goes outside to check it. She hears Anthony's room door open but see he is not inside and finds his standing outside. She goes near him, and Anthony gets scared and wakes up saying he must be sleepwalking. He says he's stressed for the movie, and second day of shoot begins where Anthony is doing a scene with Joe. Anthony is unable to say his lines properly, and Peter tells him to say the lines as if Anthony really feels them. Anthony starts the scene again, but Peter is not happy with the result and tells Anthony to believe in himself. He tells Anthony he faced a lot of difficulty to get the production house to approve Anthony as an actor. He tells Anthony to feel like the character who left his wife-child when she was sick and is a bad person. Anthony feels that this character is somewhat similar to his own life, and Peter goes to shoot the scene. Suddenly a light falls near Peter and he manages to escape without getting hurt, and all feel scared. Later, in his vanity van, Anthony finds a cross and Tom's script, who is the actor before him. He sees that Tom has written many things with a pen on the script, and he starts getting visions from his past. He finds a page which says he will not be saved and decides to keep the cross with him. Later, Lee finds Anthony in her room, who is seeing something on her desk and finds he was looking at her wife's old picture with Anthony. Later, Anthony is practicing his lines for the movie, which has names of God's angels, and suddenly feels weird. He decides to go rest in his room, and we see Anthony is standing near his door, and Lee finds his one slipper. She sees Anthony has gone down in the basement and is speaking something in Latin and goes downstairs. She records his voice on her phone but drops the phone and goes down and picks it up. He sees Anthony is standing naked and pissing on the floor, and suddenly Anthony comes close to her. Lee gets scared and shouts, and Anthony runs upstairs and looks at her from above. Later, Anthony takes shower not remembering anything, and Lee asks him if he is taking his medicines. We see something black growing on Anthony's body and he looks in pain. On 11th day of shoot, Peter is watching the movie footage and finds Anthony is looking sick on screen. Peter is not happy with the shoot, and Lee hears this and meets Connor in the room. Connor says it must be difficult for Lee to see her father like this, and says he has helped many addicts. Later, we see Anthony has started drinking again, and Lee goes for a walk with Blake. She tells her she wishes her father had died instead of her mom and asks if she is a horrible person. After returning home, Lee finds Anthony is sitting in the dark and finds he has cut his hands. He is bleeding and doesn't remember what happened, and Lee smells the alcohol on him. Lee gets angry on him and asks whether he is taking his medicines. Anthony says he can't sleep as she sees his wife. Lee says she going from here but sees the door close on its own, and Anthony asks her where she will go. Anthony says she only has her father now since her mother died, and Lee cries and leaves from there. Next day, Lee goes to Anthony's van to deliver his script and finds he is unable to bandage his hands. She applies some medicine on his hands, and Anthony apologizes for his behavior at night. He says that because of the role he is acting like this and asks her to leave him and go back to school. Lee feels sorry for him and cries and goes to visit Connor in church with Blake. She tells Connor that Anthony is sleepwalking and acting weird, and Connor says maybe the movie is bringing up his old trauma. Lee says she knows about his childhood tragedy and tells Connor that Anthony was speaking in Latin. She plays the audio recording on the phone, and Connor says Anthony is talking about a demon Molech. This demon is the same on which the movie is being made, and says maybe the role is affecting Anthony. Connor says he'll talk to Anthony and asks Lee not to worry too much about her father. Later, Connor reads an old book about Molech and feels something strange, and we see Anthony has a dream about his molestation. On 18th day of shoot, Anthony feels sick and is unable to say any line which has God's prayer in it. Lee sees he is in pain, and Peter gets angry and tells Anthony to show what he learned from the priest in his childhood. Anthony gets angry on hearing this and is downstairs and twists his body and bends his backwards. Everyone and Connor get scared on seeing this, and Anthony slams his body on the floor. The lights go out, and we see Anthony is sitting at a table and repeatedly bangs his head on it. Peter meets Joe and tells him he has to do Anthony's role as he is not well and they can't stop the shoot. Joe is reluctant at first but agrees and starts practicing his lines and goes to change his costume. He wears the priest's dress and says his lines but hears some noise and feels scared. Suddenly, he is attacked by Anthony, who stabs a glass in his eye and kills Joe and leaves from there. Later, Lee gives Anthony his medicines and meets Blake and comes to know the movie has been shut. She tells Lee Joe has been found dead, and we see Anthony spits his medicine out and looks possessed. Joe and Blake have feelings for each other and kiss, but suddenly hear a loud noise from outside. She goes to Anthony's room and finds him coughing and asks Blake to go and get some help. Lee sees Anthony is talking in demonic voice, and he asks them to kiss each other and attacks Lee. He throws Lee on the table and bites her cheek, and Blake pushed him and manages to save Lee. Anthony goes near a window and jumps from there and escapes, and Lee and Blake are in a shock. They go to meet Connor, who says when a body is consumed by darkness, it can do such things. Connor says he will save Anthony and gets ready to free Anthony and asks Lee and Blake to be brave. Connor goes inside cold room set, and suddenly the lights go out and Lee is alone in the room. She takes a light and hears some noise coming and sees some smoke coming out of cold room. She goes in the set and sees a Bible on the ground, but it moves when Lee tries to pick it up. She picks it up and sees Anthony is behind her, possessed by Molech, and finds Connor and Blake also possessed by demon. Lee tries to read from Bible and Molech repeats some lines and says she doesn't believe in this. Lee asks Molech to free Anthony, but he says he needs Anthony and says Anthony never wanted a child. Lee tells him to stop saying lies, and Molech walks towards Lee and grabs her neck to kill her. Lee uses a cross on Molech's face to injure him, which frees Connor and Blake. Connor tells them to be prepared to run and goes to Molech and tells him to take him instead of Anthony. Molech accepts this and possesses Connor and sees visions of how Anthony was molested by his church father. He frees Anthony, who falls on the ground, and everything starts shaking, and Anthony takes the Bible. He starts reading it, but Molech burns it, and Anthony remembers his old prayers and starts reading that. Molech starts feeling uneasy, and everyone starts praying together, and we see Molech is in pain. He gets up from the bed and says no one can save them, and Anthony takes the cross from his pocket and stabs it in his head. Molech's entire body is set on fire, and he falls on the ground, and his entire body is burnt, and he dies. Later we see Anthony, who says his relation with Lee has improved, and he is a changed man now. Lee has also started working on her script seriously, and Anthony thanks God for his second chance.